Climate change is fundamentally driven by geopolitics. Our best hope now is that the Earth takes care of us. And I really don't see such a big distinction between adults and children. I mean, in their capacities for understanding.
So hello and welcome to the weeks off the shelf, and we have Amitav Ghosh, and it's always wonderful to have him. And he's just back. He's in Goa, and this is he's come back to India after a very long time, and he says he's jet lagged. We're going to talk about his new book, which is The Living Mountain, which is wonderful. It's a fable, but it's so much more than that. And I'm really excited that he's on this. So welcome. So happy to have you here. And it's been a while since you've come back to India, right?
Well, not that long a while. I was here in January, so a few months.
Okay, so I thought you were not here through the lockdown. That was so it's.
No, I wasn't here in 2020 at all.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been and you're in Goa, which is always wonderful. So I wanted let's start about let's talk about the book. So you talk about this is a dream, so it's wonderful. You talk about the living mountains, and then you kind of know before where the book is going, where it's likely to go, and you say that the anthropologists come in and they tell you that everything that you do is wrong, that you do not use the fruits of the mountain, so we must. We have full right on it. And in that way, it's sort of an echo about the nutmeg's curse. You talk about this, that's where it all starts with globalization. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you've said that it's kind of like a children's story, because it is and it isn't, I suppose. And I really don't see such a big distinction between adults and children. I mean, in their capacities for understanding, especially today. But, I finally ended up writing the story in this form for actually a collection on the Anthropocene, done by sort of the biggest, heaviest experts on the subject, geologists, scientists, paleobotanists, and so on. If you like, it's a parable about what it is, because it's not just that the Dutch are treating people, as resources. They're treating also trees as resources. They're treating the entire landscape as a resource. Just exists to be exploited. Yeah. And what we see now is that this has literally set the disastrous course that that we are on, and a course that is actually going to destroy the world very soon.
Yeah. So I think you say that in the nutmeg's curse, right, where and I think in some ways. Because I have read the Nutmeg's Curse so recently, practically, right, and we had this conversation, right, that it somehow brings back that memory of it too. And I think you talk about how it changes, stories and folklore into the economy, into sort of into a negotiating market economy phase, right? That's what it does. So it changes the way we view things as land. I think you had this wonderful passage where you talk about how land moves from just being this gift or sort of, a place which is very much like the living mountain, where they don't climb the mountain, where the stories, they promise that strangers won't go there. It's a living thing. The adepts dance about it. To have these things where it changes the way you see that, and it becomes part of it becomes usable, and it becomes part of the economy, exploitative.
Exactly.
And that kind of is the shift, which is also at the heart of the mountain, right? Which is
absolutely. I mean, and we see this battle going on right now. I mean, all across the world, it's a remarkable thing that indigenous peoples are only 17% of the world's population, but have half the land. I mean, in the sense of forests and so on. And they've been good custodians of this land. I mean, now we know that many of these forests are actually not really forests; they're more like gardens, where the forest people people sort of interfere with the right. And now we see this this whole process of them being dispossessed from their lands being taken away, turned into coal mines, turned into being exploited for natural gas or petrol or whatever it may be. And that's really the process that's consuming the world. That's the process that's really destroying this planet.
Yeah, and I think you in the last few, you've talked about the silence of climate change in literature, and could you at this point of time, when you look at the recent reports where they say that it's no longer that really the end is now imminent. What we thought was going to happen, we thought that it was going to be slower, but it's actually accelerated, right? Can you then talk about really like the living mountain, and it's not even that the jungle Nama, flood of fire, where you actually address this really gigantic issue which writers have not been able to grapple with, or are silent about. Can you talk about the need to actually address this, really?
Yeah, I wouldn't, right. It's not that writers haven't written about it or have ignored it completely or anything like that. But there are two things here. One is, yes, some of this material is difficult for fiction writers to deal with, because fiction writers have been told for a long time that their material consists of identity issues, or sort of like gender issues, or love stories or stuff like that. And these things are very difficult. Issues like these are very hard to fit into the scope of the conventional novel. But it's not like writers haven't tried. But I would say that it's the whole sort of ecosystem of literature that has squeezed out this writing, because even if the writer writes it, the way that it receives, the way that it's received by the wider ecosystem is such as to marginalize this writing, and that's the really sad part of it. But yes, I think that has changed very much. I think 2018 was, in many ways, since then, an outpouring of writing of many different kinds on these issues. I can tell you that, on my public website, I'm sent like a story or a book every other day.
In some ways, that climate change is such a pressing, is such a pressing concern for all of us. But there is no vocabulary that, this thing. And I think we talked about this earlier too, about how folklore in some ways is probably, how do you sort of make it, how do you take it on? You said that this is part of a larger, more adult, very serious, research thing. But yet, the Living Mountain is really about putting all that dense in this thing to sort of simplify it and make it real for the other person, right? And I think that's at the heart of what your writing is. Where,
so Mandira, the issue in relation to climate change is that climate of scientific lens, So it's sort of science and technology, a lot of numbers, a lot of nerdy facts, as it were. And of course, I've read all that stuff, so I know how it's presented. But I think that creates the impression that that climate change is something that can just be fixed by technology and science and so on, and that what drives it is basically technology and science. And that's not the case. I think climate change is fundamentally driven by geopolitics, and it's fundamentally a conflictual process. I mean, just like the people in my story. The people who are being worst affected by climate change experience it as violence. The refugees, the people who are being dispossessed from, say, the Sundarbans and so on. For them, it's very much active.
And what I thought was also what interesting about the book was that at some point of time, and you talk about colonialism, of course, but you also talk about something which is central to India at the moment, as well as something that is very central to you, where you talk about when you say that the anthropologists tell tell them that they buy the fact that they were not good enough, they can't climb the mountain. And they say that the reason they're not strong enough is because their values are, not universal, right? And can you talk a little about that, about India and the fact that we are losing indigenous knowledge, the fact that we're losing who we really are in some ways?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is the terrible thing that really happened with the imposition of these colonial forms of knowledge. In the first place, there was this vision of other ways of knowing, other ways of learning. And secondly, there's a constant denigration of indigenous wisdom, of indigenous ways of being. And now what we see actually is that those forms of universal knowledge, if you like, are the ones that have actually created this disaster.
Yeah.
For example, for a while, for like 100 years, going back from the 1980s, it was thought to be a great idea to build all these huge dams. So not just in India, in America as well, dam after dam after dam. And now they find that the dams are the disaster.
Yeah.
They are having to actually dismantle dams at an incredible rate.
Yeah, China too.
In India, we had amazing water conservation techniques.
Mm-hmm.
But, it was thought a great thing to have the electric water pump. Suddenly it became the pastime for farmers to just sit there pumping up fossil water with subsidized electricity. And now we know the aquifers are dwindling to the point where they're going to collapse. So in so many ways, when you look at our ancestors' ways of living, they clearly had a much better sense of how to interact with the earth. Look, our ancestors got many things wrong. Obviously, there are many things about their practices that we would not accept. But certainly, they got some things right. I mean, they realized, that tanks are a sensible thing, to store water. They had all kinds of water management techniques, and fundamentally, the people in the forests, they still practice many of those techniques and technologies. And it's not just here, it's in many parts of the world that indigenous peoples do this. So now, for example, after 200 years of trying to stomp out Native American ways of dealing with the landscape, they're finally trying to actually find a few Native Americans who remember those techniques,
Yeah, because
suddenly they've begun to realize.
Yeah, in the book too, there is, they try and remember and they find they cannot remember, and they find this one woman. And I thought, I would want to talk to you about that too. I mean, while of course it is about it's about losing native knowledge, it's about losing your identity in some way, losing your stories. It's also, you have a gender this thing. So all the deaths are women, which I love, older women who sort of come. And then they locked them up, and they locked up the musicians, they locked up the storytellers, they locked up everybody who was, were different in some ways, or a dissident. Do you think it's also that? Do you think it's?
These things actually happened. I mean, in Australia as well as America, they really banned all practice of the native religion, of native, even the languages they tried to stamp them out. So now, and to some degree, they were even successful. So now suddenly, the realization has come about that in doing all this, they created a disaster. And sadly, we are also following in those footsteps. In trying to remove Adivasis from their lands, in trying to stamp out Adivasi knowledge, and sort of pretending that like technical forestry is better, but it isn't. I mean, they understand their forests much better than they are the ones who really genuinely understand the forest.
And you also say something at the end where, so do you think that it ends on hope? Do you think also, and I also wanted to ask you one more question before I ask you that, there is this aspect where you also talk about I don't know whether I'm imagining whether this is where you talk about, when you talk about what is happening later, the neocolonialism and the sort of taking over the climate change narrative, where poorer countries who now have to climb up this mountain, and the only way of survival is this. And the appetite, as you say, I think you say that that they cannot stop climbing the mountain. This is the only way. So can you talk really about that, about the fact that even if you realize, and if we sort of try and come to about power structures in this whole climate change narrative?
Very much so. I was in one of those Indonesian islands. It's actually called Ternate, where cloves were their great contribution to the world. Cloves were endemic to Ternate. But Ternate is now being very badly affected by climate change, and the clove trees are dying, in the very place where they were born. And I remember talking to many people there and saying, don't you think, because your clove trees are dying, that you should shrink your carbon footprint? And what they all said uniformly is exactly the same thing that you hear in Delhi or Beijing or Jakarta, which is, why should we shrink our carbon footprint? They over there in the affluent world got rich at our expense when we were poor and weak. Now it's our turn. So, you see within the global South, this is seen very much as a geopolitical process. And I think this is something that Westerners just do not understand. They think climate change, what they call climate change, I would say it's much bigger than climate change. It's a planetary crisis, which is also a geopolitical crisis. But they think it's just something that can be fixed with technological fixes. Whereas I think to all of us, it's clear that this is something else altogether. It's a part of a geopolitical struggle.
But do you think we can come like the living mountain if they find the adept who comes out, and can we hear from the soles of our feet? Is there a way to turn this back?
Well, I think maybe what she's saying, I can't be saying, but maybe what she's saying is that forget that arrogance, that you're taking care of the mountain or of the earth or whatever. Our best hope now is that the earth takes care of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that can apply for a lot of things. I think there is a lot of things with arrogance that we have. But you're right, with the earth we should.
Yes.
So thank you so much. Thank you for being part of this. So,
thank you, Mandira. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm glad we could talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad we could talk. Thank you.